gives you a secondary dialog box. In the Create New section, you now have to set up this file. If you are making an illustration for the web, it will be a different process than if you're making an illustration for print. We only work in print here, okay? So your first thing you're going to do is go shift this over to print. Now, if you notice, the default is in points. That is a screen-based measurement, or newspapers will use it, though they'll usually use a different measurement. For our sake, for this class, switch it to inches. So you're going to switch over to print, you're going to change your dimensions to inches, and then you're going to change your ratio to either 8 by 10 or 10 by 8, which is the ratio that we use for every single project. It should be pretty easy to remember that. So for the sake of argument, I'm just going to do 8 by 10, not 210 by 10. What you'll notice is if I open my advanced options, it's already set to CMYK and already set to 300 because I selected print. But before you create the file, it's a good idea just to open your advanced options and make sure that those are your two sets. That you're set to 300 PPI and CMYK for your color scheme. And then you just hit create. It's going to give you your file. Now, those of you that are working at school, I'll also skip the tour. It's going to open every time. It's annoying. It's a terrible tour. It's not going to teach you anything.
Why is it there?
Because it's Adobe and they try to do everything. What you want to make sure is all of my packets that I give you in the future are based off of the Essentials workspace. So what you need to do if you're working from home and you're trying to follow along with the way I showed you how to do things, you need to make sure you're on an Essentials work path, which is up here. At the top, you have a drop-down menu. Essentials is what all of the information I give you is under the Essentials workspace. The workspaces are completely customizable. You can use whatever workspace you're comfortable with, but your things are not going to be in the same spots. You're going to have different menus. You're going to have different options. So if you want to follow along with the way I'm showing you how to do things, you need to use the Essentials palette. Okay, I'll redo some of the things for you that I have because the Essentials palette here is not the same because it's not up to date. That's fine. Let's see if there's one that's closer to the palette I use. Alright, for the sake of argument, just keep it on Essentials Classic for now. I will redo some of your handouts. Essentials Classic will still have basically everything I'm utilizing. The images that you'll be seeing from me later on will be slightly different, but you'll still have an idea of where they are as long as you're paying attention right now. So, I'm going to go over a couple of basic things. I have a list here that I want to go over. So the first thing you have to understand about Illustrator is that you create the fill and the stroke on everything. The fill is the color inside of the shape, the stroke is the outline. Basic, easy to understand. There are 3 places to locate these easily. The first is going to be right here. The solid color is your fill, the outline color is your stroke. You can swap between them using the arrow, which will swap your colors. So if you actually want to invert them, you can. If you need to go back to your default, which is black and white, you can just hit the black and white down here. If you need to toggle between which one is in front, because if I have the fill, right now the white fill is in front, that means any edits I make right now, any changes I make to the color, are going to affect the fill only. If what I mean to do is affect the stroke, I can either click on the stroke to bring it to the front, or I can hit X on the keyboard. X is the hotkey to toggle back and forth between what's on the front. The second place that you can change these, and where you should change the colors, is going to be in your drop-down menu up here. This is the same thing as down here, but they're separated. So if I click this drop-down menu, it brings down all my colors for the fill. And because I have this set to CMYK, these are my CMYK defaults. We'll talk about strokes next week. Or we'll talk about swatches, rather, next week. Same thing for the drop-down for the stroke. So the stroke, again, is the square, or the outline, and the fill is the solid color. With a stroke, you also have the weight of the stroke. That's how thick the line is. You can change that right next to this. Or, alternately, you have a full stroke palette, which will appear over here on the right-hand menu. If I click that, it brings up a big dialog box where I can change the weight, I can change the capping, I can turn it into a dashed line, all of that stuff. So, then I need to decide how to make a shape. So, the easiest way to make a shape is to use the shape tool. The shape tool is going to give you default shapes. Shape tool is right here on the menu. It looks like a rectangle as the default. If I click and hold it, it will give me my other options. I have a rectangle, I have a rounded rectangle, I have an ellipse, that's a circle or an oval. I have a polygonal tool, I have a star tool. We do not use the flare tool, it's garbage. Don't ever use the flare tool. Not ever, but in this one. So, I'm going to start with the basic, I'm going to start with the rectangle. When I have the rectangle, I have 3 different ways to place this. I can place it just by drawing, and that's a free form. And when I drop it, I now have a white square with a black line in it. I can change the color of the fill. I can change the color of the stroke. I can change the weight of the stroke, which is my outline. The second way I can drop this is by dropping it, actually there's 4 ways. I can drop it holding shift while I click and drag. While I hold shift, what do you guys notice?
There's some kind of pink up.
Nope. What does somebody else notice?
It stays the same dimensions.
It is the same, it is a square ratio. It's a perfect ratio. So if I'm trying to make a perfect square, I hold shift. This does not just count towards squares. This refers to any shape. So if I'm doing a circle, I'm going to change my colors. You can change your colors after you place your tool, or if I click off of this, so nothing is selected, and I change the color beforehand, change my fill to pink, change my stroke to a dark green, change my stroke weight now to a thinner stroke weight. And now instead of using the square, I'm going to use the ellipse, which is going to give me an oval shape. If I hold shift, it's going to give me a perfect circle. Again, after you place it, you can change your things again. This is what I mean by it is editable. You can, once you've placed it, you don't have to commit to that. In Photoshop, when you guys paint something, you're committed to it. You can adjust it with opacity, with layering, but you can never 100% change the color and the options that you utilize. In Illustrator, you have complete control after you've placed something. So, the third way you can place is directly from the center. If you hold Option instead of Shift when you place, Option pulls from the middle. So does everybody see how wherever my cursor is, if I'm holding Option, it even gives me a little circle icon to show me I'm pulling from the middle. It will pull directly from the center. If I hold Option and Shift, it will give me a perfect circle from the center. Easy enough? Fairly simple, fairly straightforward. All of these other tools do other shapes. The star tool will give you a star. Depending on where your cursor is, you can rotate that star. Now, the fourth way to place an object. If you know exactly how big you need any shape to be, you just click rather than click and drag. If I click, it opens a new dialog box. Now I can tell it I need a 2-inch by 4-inch rectangle. And I hit return, and it gives me my 2-inch by 4-inch rectangle. Understood? Yes?
If you were to enlarge the weight of the stroke, would that enlarge inwards or outwards?
It does both. It does half and half. So do you see my blue line? My blue line is 2 inches by 4 inches, because that's what I set it as. So the stroke appears half within and half without. So it expands the size. Good question. That's next week. So, I'm going to delete these, because we're moving on to the next option, which is, oh, I already covered fill and stroke. Oh, I'll show you one other thing. So, if I do, a square like that, and then let's say I do another square, I'm going to change the colors But let's say I don't need a stroke. You don't have to have a stroke. You just hit none under your color palette. Now you have no stroke. It is just exactly that square. So if I need it to be exactly 2 by exactly 4, I don't want a stroke because that will change the size. Conversely, you can do the same thing with only a stroke. So if I want no fill and I only want a stroke of 10 points, and now I have, it looks like it might be a white box, but if I move it off, you can see through it. I can overlap it. Understood? Stroke and fill are not, they do not have to be together. It is not mutually exclusive. You can utilize one, you can utilize the other, or you can use both. The other way to make shapes is going to be using the line tool. So the line tool is right over here. And with the line tool, what that does is it allows you to do point A to point B. So if I just click, I can decide how long I need a line. If I need a 2-inch line with no angle, that goes completely across, and I have a 2-inch line. Or I can just click and drag anywhere, and wherever I click will be my first point, and wherever I drop will be my second point. Everybody knows a line is just the meaning of 2 points. That's what a line is. Okay. So if I need that line to be at a specific angle, I use shift, just like if we need it to be a perfect square. So if you hold shift, it gives you degrees of 45. So if I hold shift, there's my 0 degrees, 45 degrees. I'm holding shift as I drag, and it's snapping to a 45-degree angle. So if I need to, make something a specific angle, this is what a 45-degree angle would look like versus my free-handed attempt at a 45-degree angle. If I need to pull from the middle, just like with the shapes, I hold Option. Ooh, not with that. I hold Option with the line tool, and it pulls directly from the middle. Okay? That's my line and my stroke. Okay, and now with a line, because this is only affecting a stroke, I'm going to show you how to now use the stroke palette over here. Though you can do this with shapes too. It's not just with lines. The stroke palette over here, since I'm selected on this, it will affect this. I can change the weight again. I can create a dashed line. I can decide how big the dashes are. This is my point gap. If I need, one that's, if I want the gap to be the same as the width of the stroke, then it would be a 4-inch stroke, 4-inch gap. What this will give me is little tiny perfect squares. I can also change the end cap. If you look right now, my strokes are flat. My strokes are blunted. Instead, I can change my end cap to a rounded, if I select on it and change it. You see how that shape is now a rounded shape instead? If I want to change my stroke to a dash stroke on something that already exists, I can. And then you can see the size of your square underneath the stroke. So that's 2 different ways to make shapes, using the shape tools, using the line tool. The third way, the most complex way, and the way that you're going to be doing 90% of your work in Illustrator, is with the pen tool. Who's used the pen tool before, in Illustrator specifically? You haven't? Or you did? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So, the pen tool is your drawing tool in Illustrator. One up. There's also a pencil tool that we don't really cover. It works similarly. Pencil tools are usually a little more responsive in Photoshop. That's why we don't really cover it in Illustrator. It's a little more work to learn that, so it's a little more advanced. Since we're just introducing you, I'm going to quickly reset this to my default, black and white. I'm going to just click to a point, and you'll hear multiple clicks. What that is each point, or each click, is setting a point in my illustration. So if I click, and I need to draw, a shape that looks like that, I've drawn that shape. But if you notice, I'm still open. So what I need to do is I need to close that shape if I'm supposed to have a fill. So if I close the shape, all I have to do is go back to my initial point. You see how the little circle appears? That's how you know you're closing a shape. So when
a polygonal lasso tool?
Similar, but it doesn't act exactly the same, and I'll show you why in a minute. So I've now created a closed shape. If I change the colors, it'll be a little easier to see what I mean when I talk about the closed shape. It's filled with red, and the stroke is black. That's my filled shape. But you may not always need a closed shape for what you're working on. So, two different ways to keep a shape open. Let's say I need this shape to look like that instead. I don't need this last black line. I need it to stay open. If you hold Option, I think. Yes, Option and click, it cancels the last stroke. So you don't need to do it. Alternatively, you can also just hit Escape. If I just hit Escape, no, it doesn't do it anymore. Oh, it is. Okay. Just Option and click anywhere on the screen, and it will keep your shape open. Or you can just hit Escape to exit out of the pen tool. So, after you've drawn your shape and kept it either open or closed, whatever your option is, you can now adjust it. So let's say I drew this out, but what I really need is just the red shape. I don't need the stroke. Just turn the stroke off. Go switch it to none in your color palette, and then you'll look like that. And now your shape has no stroke. So, additionally, what Illustrator has is that makes a really rigid, straight drawing, right? That's great if you're drawing a building that has all straight edges, but what happens when you need to make a curve? This is where practice is going to make perfect. This is not an easy tool to use if you've never done this before. But with the pen tool, to make my straight shapes, I just click wherever I need the shape. To make a converse or convex shape, if I need to make an arc within that, I'm totally going to separate you two. If I need to make an arc, I need to click my first location, go to my second one, but instead of just clicking, I'm going to click and hold, and then I can drag. What this is going to do is it's going to allow me to create an arc. What you'll notice after you click that first arc is that Illustrator will automatically try to intuit what the next arc should look like. What it's trying to do is it's trying to make a smooth shape. So wherever you click, it's trying to keep this line as smooth as possible. So if that's what you need, like if you're doing your, not this next assignment, but the assignment after, if you're doing your self-portrait and you're trying to draw your eye, you probably are trying to keep that line very smooth. And this intuitive arc is going to be well placed for your drawing. But if you only needed this arc, and this arc is not, let's say the line really needs to go from here and then curve in like that. This intuit is going to try to keep your line smooth by bumping out. So if that's not what you need, all you have to do is click on the point you just made. If I click it, it's now going to give me a free point for my next step. So I can either make a straight line or I can create my curve that I need to create within that. Now, do you guys notice these little shapes that are popping out every time I make a point that's at an arc? That whenever I make a straight point, I don't get those. When I make an arc, I get those. Those are called handles. With your handle, this is how after you finish the shape, you can tweak it. So it's important to realize if you have handles or not. If you have an arced shape, then you're going to have handles that you can fix afterward. So once I've decided I have my shape, I can close it, or if my shape is not supposed to be closed, I can either option click anywhere, or I can hit escape and keep my shape open. I can now go into this and change my stroke if I need to have a stroke, change my colors as I need to. Freedom of editability in Illustrator. Now the last two things I'm going to show you is how to edit within this. So, with the pen tool, after you've closed a shape or intentionally left a shape open, you can add to and subtract points simply by clicking with the pen tool. If I hover over a point that I created and click it, oh, sorry, you have to be selected on the object. I wasn't still selected. Selected on the object, and then go to the pen tool. Do you see how I can see my points?
Mm-hmm.
That's how I know I'm selected on the object. If I hover over any point that I have, do you see the little minus symbol up here next to my icon? That means I'll remove that point. So let's say I actually didn't need this point. If I click it, it goes away. And all of the lines that that point created go away. If that took away too much, then maybe I need to add a point in the middle. Do you see how if I hover over a line segment that does not have a point on it, I see the plus symbol? That means I'm adding a point there. So if I add a point above and below that segment, and then click that segment, it just takes away the smaller segment that I just made. guys are going to get lost. Now, the last tool that I'm going to show you today is going to be the difference between your selection and your direct selection. So if you look up at the top of your left-hand icon, you have two different arrows. You have one arrow that's black with a white outline and one that's all white. The one that's black with the white outline is called your selection tool. This selects a whole object. So any closed or unclosed shape is an object. So if I just click this, now whatever I do is simply moving. This is how I would move an object I've drawn or resize or rotate an object I've drawn using the regular, just the selection tool. If I pull from the corner, I can skew it. If I hold shift, it will retain its ratio and simply enlarge or minimize it. I can skew from any side as well. And if I need to rotate, I just hover at a corner and rotate. If I hold shift when I rotate, it will rotate at those 45 degrees, just like when I was making a line segment and holding shift. If I need to move any of the individual pieces of that drawing, any individual points or any handle on any arc points, I have to use the direct selection tool. That's the tool next to it, that's a white arrow. The direct selection tool, if I just select the direct selection tool and click, I can see all of my points. So do you see how I have all 4 points here within this? And they're all blue. That means all 4 points are selected right now. However, if I go in with the direct selection tool and click a single point, now that is the only point that's blue. That means that is the only point that's selected, and it will show my handles that are connected to that point. So I see both handles for the point I have selected, and I see one handle for the point after it, because this handle also affects what this point is doing. So you get to see every handle that your point has control of or is affected by. So if I take this handle and I pull it out, I can change the shape. If I rotate it, I can change the arc. I can do the same thing with just the pixels, or just the points. I can pull just a point out and not a handle. I can, just like with the pen tool, if you click it, you can remove it. You can also select a point and delete it. However, when you delete a point using the direct selection tool, it doesn't just reconnect these two, which is what happens if I remove it with the pen tool. Everybody saw how it reconnected. It doesn't reconnect if I delete the point. If I delete the point, it now returns to an open shape. It removes that point and any line that that point created. I think that's all we need to go over today. But, back there. We've got an hour left. Why don't you guys go ahead and take a 10-minute break and come back, and then we're gonna have a couple of assignments for you guys to do in class.